lead us in prayer?
Father, thank you for this opportunity we have now to study more of your word. We pray, Father, that you'll be in our hands, the rest of our class. Help each of us listen, we might be able to better understand your word. We pray for the ones who cannot be out today, but still in the praise you. Help them get feeling better and soon be able to come back with us. We pray now that you're with us in our study this morning. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Good morning. We want to welcome you to our class this morning. And as you all know, that I am not a public speaker, so I will need your help as we go along in class today. So if I ask someone to read or ask a section to read, someone can find it and read out of the Bible to get you all participating, okay? First off, we're in Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 through 48. If you want to open your Bibles there to start with. When I was looking over this lesson, I always like to say, well, how would you, say what you're going to do or what you're studying about? And this one, I really couldn't decide on the first part of it, what to say. So I wrote down 4 things. The title would be Oath and Vows, Honesty in Speech, Tell the Truth, the Whole Truth, and Nothing But the Truth, or nothing else. It would be Don't Lie, would be one of the 4 that I would have. Let's start in verse 33 through 37 would be the first part. And it says, Again, you have heard that the ancients were told, You shall not make false vows, but shall fulfill your vows to the Lord. But I say to you, make no oath at all, neither by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is the footstool of his feet, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Nor shall you make an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your statements be yes, yes, or no, no, and anything beyond these is of evil. I don't think this table's big enough to hold everything. Okay, most people are familiar with what we've just read there about being honest with everything, not lying. What's it say in Proverbs 6:12? Anybody want to read that? Okay, I'm sorry. 6:17. I've read the wrong.
Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood.
Okay. So we read here that God does not like a lying tongue. As we can see here, in the 10 Commandments, and he does not. It says there the same thing, and in Proverbs says that liars will not escape punishment. So we can see that God doesn't like lying. We're going to be punished if we do lie. Now, the Mosaical law is where we get a lot of the lying here. When did God give the Mosaical law? He gave it to Moses when they first came out of Egypt. What laws did they have before they came out of Egypt? Anybody know? What laws were they obeying? It's a good question, isn't it? Were they obeying what they were used to for 400 years, the Egyptian laws? I really can't answer that myself. I've read into it a little bit, and no one that I can see has the answer. Hunter, did you know anything about what they followed?
Well, it was a patriarchal age. So they had an understanding of God, so they didn't yet have any legislative law or written commandments. So I assume they followed the laws of the lands they were in. And since they were enslaved in Egypt, they really didn't have a choice.
Okay.
That would be my estimation.
That was my estimation too, sort of, but don't really know, but you would assume that that's what they did. So we have the Mosaical law given about 1,300 years before Jesus was giving his talk here out of chapter 6. I'm sorry, out of chapter 5. So we have a time period of 1,300 years or so difference from when the Mosaical law was given and then what some of the Pharisees were trying to do with the law. Do you think the Pharisees or the leaders of the Israelites tried to change laws? How long have we been a nation? Less than 300 years. Are we trying to change our Constitution? Yes? No? It seems like it some of the time, doesn't it? So, can you imagine doing 1,300 years, how much the leaders of the Israel nation was trying to change some of their laws and not sticking to them like God wants you to or wanted them to. And if we read in, someone want to read Exodus 20:16. How about someone over here? My left-hand side. The center section, Leviticus 19:12, and someone on the right-hand side, Numbers 32. Okay. No. You shall not bear false witness in the Sabbath. That was Leviticus 19:12. It's a small group in the Sabbath. Okay, you shall not swear falsely by my name. Numbers 32, 30, verse 2.
If a man vows by the Lord, vow to the Lord, or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, and shall not break his word, and shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth.
Okay. So, if a man vows a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to the Lord, he shouldn't break it. Okay? This is where the Pharisees were doing in the New Testament. They were regulating on what honesty is. They were shifting attention away from the vow and the need to keep it, and made a formula that the vow is not the important thing, but what you're vowing on. Okay? In other words, they would, like it says there in verse 34, 35, you vowed, take an oath by heaven or the throne of God, okay? They're all made by God. They're all God made. If you take a vow or an oath, you shouldn't break it. That's what it says in 36. But they're talking about, can you change the color of your hair? Not for very long if you do, right? Clairol says you can change the color of your hair anyway. But, you really can't. It will come back what it's going to come back eventually. So you don't have that. So how are you going to make a vow? Back then, they were trying to say that, the Pharisees were trying to say that you vow on this, to God, and it's okay. But if you have to keep that vow. But if you vow on something else, you don't have to keep that vow. So they're saying you can lie, even though you're vowing on something. That's where they distorted what he was saying here. And Jesus was trying to get them back on track. Someone want to read a long verses, Matthew 23, 16 through 22. Thank you, Tim. You can speak up. Matthew 23, 16 through 22.
Woe to you, blind guides, who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. You blind fools, for whichever is greater, the gold or the temple that is made of gold is sacred. And you say, if anyone swears by the altar, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift that is on the altar, he is bound by his oath. You blind men, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears by him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God, by him who sits upon it.
Thank you. So you can see here how they tried to switch things around by saying one thing is good. You can, if you're swearing by God, you have to keep that. But if you're swearing by something else, you don't have to keep the oath or the vow you made there. So what did Jesus teach in honesty here? Regardless of how regardless of how hard one tries, he cannot avoid some reference to deity. Here, if you swear or in a vow, it belongs to God. God made everything, so it belongs to him. Heaven is his throne, earth is his footstool, and he knows your every hair that you have. So everything belongs to him. So the Pharisees here tried to twist it around, manipulate the law. Okay? I'm not going to pick on Tim anymore because he's a lawyer, so we won't ask about manipulating the law since he's here. Everybody knows that some people try to manipulate it and read things into it that isn't and add things that are not in it. So the laws we have today even. The basic gist of Jesus' teaching was that vows are binding regardless of the formula. Okay? People are to be people of their word, so that vows are unnecessary. If you're a person that always tells the truth, you need to make a vow. Do I see any head shaking this way or this way? Not very much shaking either way. Okay, no, we don't need to really make a vow if we're always telling the truth. We're always, if we're not lying. So it's a discipline to simply say yes or no, because it's it's how our character is that you're trying to strive. He also adds there at the end in verse 37, yes, yes, and no, no. Anything beyond these is of the evil. Who is the evil? The devil. I saw your lips move. I could read lips this far away. Okay, it's of the devil. Okay, the devil is the evil one. He's the father of lies, as it says in John 8:44. So we need to make sure we aren't one of his disciples, the devil's disciples. We want to be God's disciples. Any questions or anything before we go on? If not, what's the difference between an oath and a vow? Anybody have any idea? I'm sure everybody has taken an oath. Everybody in here basically has taken a vow. What's the vow? What's the difference between them? Okay, I looked it up to make sure I was correct. An oath is made in the presence of God, and a vow is a promise made to God. So there is a difference between an oath and a vow. Everybody took a marriage vow. But if you are sworn in for some job, sometimes you're taking an oath. That's the difference between them. Okay? Sometimes we think they're the same, is what I'm trying to get at, I guess. But there is a difference. Okay. Is it absolutely prohibited against swearing or making a vow? We've all done it. Is it wrong? Who do you know in the Bible that gave vows? Who do you think gave a vow in the Bible? Let's look in Genesis 22, 16, and 17. Bill, could you read that for us? Okay. First book of the Bible. I always joke when I'm teaching the kids where to find it at, and they go, right here on my phone, just like I've been using it.
22, 16, and 17.
16, 17, yes.
And he said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son. I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies.
Thank you. Okay, you can see here that God swore that he was going to multiply Abraham's offspring and take care of him. So God swore. Jesus also swore in Matthew 26, 63 and 64. And you have Paul making a vow or an oath and calling upon his statements in Romans 1 and Corinthians 1 and 1 Thessalonians 2 and Philippians 1. So we have several references here. So Jesus is not teaching that disciples should not respond to oaths, but that their known character should make oaths unnecessary. If you start doing oaths or swearing about everything. And sometimes I think that we all do and don't really mean to do it. If my wife gives me a list, a memory list to go shopping, okay, and there's 3 items there, and I tell her, yes, I am positive I'm going to get them. Is that a swearing I'm positive going to get them? Yes, honey, I swear I'm going to get them when I come home with 2 out of the 3. Okay? We don't need to do that, you know. You know how I got out of that now? I'd say, send it to me and I'll make sure I get it. Okay? But you can swear on a lot of things like that. Something that doesn't really mean a lot, you swear for that. We don't need to do that. We need to, you know, make our yes be yes, our no be no. I will try to get those for you, honey. Do things like that. But those are the things we don't want to swear to and things like that. That's where you're doing it wrong. You're trying to do things, swear to things you really don't need to, and you're taking God's name in vain a lot of times because you're doing it over and over and over again. Okay, let's look at Jeremiah 2:4 and read what we really need to do so we won't have to swear on things. Jeremiah 2:4. I'm sorry, Jeremiah 4:2. I'm reading backwards today.
Where the Lord lives, in truth and justice and righteousness, the nations shall bless themselves in him, and him shall they glory.
Okay, so here, what are we supposed to swear in? Truth. Swear in justice, and swear only in righteousness. So if we do those things, that's what we need to swear in. And of course, we need to can swear in his name, but don't do it all the time. Only do it on important things, like getting married, okay, things like that. You don't need to swear on everything. You don't need to take an oath on everything, but you need to take an oath on some things. Do we have problems even when we're sitting here in church about swearing things that we really don't mean that we're swearing for or vowing to do, taking an oath? Tim, since you're a song leader, I'll ask you, what if you would lead a song today, More About Jesus Would I Know, how would that, what would you think when you were singing that? Since you know the words probably by heart, so I won't tell.
When you want to know more about Jesus.
Okay. When you're at home and you get out your Bible and you have to dust it off before you start reading it, what does that tell you? That you aren't wanting to know more about Jesus. Okay? And there were several other songs they have in our workbook here that does the same thing. All to Jesus I surrender, but you're putting a dollar bill in the collection plate. Okay? Or you see someone that needs help and you don't help them. So you aren't giving all to Jesus. You're just giving a very small percentage. I've heard many lessons about giving over the years, and one thing that it was Terry Varner who gave a lesson on that one time, and he says he isn't worried about what goes in the collection plate so much as he worried about what doesn't go in there and what you're doing with that and surrendering it to God. So that's one way to look at it, is the collection plate is some of it, but what are you doing with the rest of your money or the rest of your life? You know, not only we're talking about money, but we're saying surrendering yourself. So what are you doing else that you're surrendering to God? Your time, your abilities, and things like that. Okay? That's part one of the lesson. And I'm over halfway done with the time, so we're going to have to speed along. That's what I was afraid of. When I first started looking at this, I said, that's 45 minutes on all three. So we're going to be here for what, 3 hours or whatever, 2 hours and 45 minutes, if we cover everything that we should cover in this lesson. So we'll move on here. Verses 38 through, I think it's 43, or close to that. You have heard that it is said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, do not resist him who is evil, and whoever stripes you on the right cheek, turn him the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, let him have your coat also. And whoever shall force you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks of you, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you. So we have here, Jesus was came into the world to make us selfless. Okay, we look out for personal honor and possessions is what we do a lot of the time. We look out for them. But he's saying that that we need to look in ourselves on what we want to believe here. You know, we aren't supposed, going back to the Old Testament and the law, God was giving, through Moses, these laws to be laws for a nation. Okay? We have laws today that tell us that if you murder someone, you could get up to the death penalty. Right? But sometimes you just get life in prison. Or depending on how you murdered someone, you might get just 20 years. Depends on what the judge and the jury believes that should be given. Okay? When you come to the Pharisees on this point, they were saying, no, if you had an eye plucked out, if someone plucked out your eye, you can go pluck out his right now. Okay? They weren't saying a judge should determine what needs to be done. Okay? If your eye was plucked out by a mistake, should your eye be plucked out just because you made a mistake? Maybe you were working on something and you had a screwdriver in your hand, and the guy was over on the side and your screwdriver slipped and your eye got plucked out. Okay? Should you get your eye plucked out just because his eye was plucked out? Okay? So that's what you're looking at. The Pharisees back then were saying, no, pluck it out. Revenge. Okay? And that's what we're looking at here, is having our mindset on not revenge, but on good things. Okay? Let's turn to 1 Timothy 1:8. Okay? It's a good law if we use it lawfully, okay? So we really need to look at that and make sure we're using it lawfully as we're doing that. It should be a just, merciful, beneficial, and necessary, really, to do that. And we don't want to do more or less. In other words, if you got a just law, you're good. You know, you aren't retaliating against that person. What do you feel when someone harms you or harms one of your children or your grandchildren? How do you feel? What's your first thoughts? Have anybody first thoughts? Is it retaliation? Sometimes. I'm going to get you back. Okay? A lot of times it is. That's how you feel. Okay? We have to change our mental attitude about things and go through the proper, I'll call it, proper way, our proper laws to redeem that, not take it on ourselves to go take care of the problem. And that's what they were doing back here in Jesus' time and before, is that they were just go take care of it yourself, basically. If it's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, that's what it's got to be. Okay? Again, we say, you have here in that part, again, do not resist evil. It's not to be taken as absolute call to non-resist in all situations. Okay? We are looking to have harmony in the Scriptures. And if you read in John 18:22, and 23, and he had said these things. One of the officials struck Jesus with his hand, saying, "Is that how you answer the high priest?" And Jesus answers, "If what I said is wrong, bear witness what is wrong. If what is right, why do you strike me?" So he's saying, you struck me for the wrong reason. You know, there was no reason to strike me. We read later on about the Paul demanding his rights. He was to go to Rome because he was a Roman citizen. So you have that as not following what the evil is trying to do in the world. So you don't follow all the evils. But Jesus, again, is trying to teach desires to retaliate or take vengeance on that person yourself. Let the law take care of it instead of yourself. Where, again, the Pharisees were not doing that. Okay. Any questions or anything? We'll get in part 3. I've skipped over a lot of things that we could go in depth, but again, we've ran out of time almost already. So we'll go into love your enemies, part 3. But I say, you have heard it said, you shall love your neighbors and hate your enemies. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, in order that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. And for his cause, his Son will raise on the evil and on the good, and send his rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brothers only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Therefore, you are to protect as your heavenly Father is perfect. So we have here, love your enemies. What is the thing we're looking at here is to stop. It was never in the Old Testament laws that said you were supposed to hate your enemies. Okay, which is what the Pharisees were saying back then, is you're supposed to hate your enemies. Why do you think that came about, of hating your enemies, when the Pharisees were thinking about this? What did God tell the Israelites to do when they conquered Canaan? I heard someone say something. Wipe everybody out. Okay, utterly destroy them. Okay? So because of that is probably one of the reasons why the Israelites were thinking, we don't love our enemies. We're supposed to wipe them out. So they read the wrong thing into what God was saying. In Leviticus 19:18, it says that you shall not take vengeance or bear grudges against the sons of your own people, and you should love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. So you aren't supposed to take grudges or enemies. You aren't supposed to have enemies here. But again, those Pharisees like to twist things around, but they had 1,300 years to twist it around. So it took them a while to get it to where it was in Jesus' time. They just misunderstood the law. What was Jesus corrected their misunderstanding here, or misconception. And he's done this over really what we studied last week and what we've studied today to get up to this point here. If you remember what we studied last week in chapter 5, verses 21 through 26, we studied removal of anger or hate was the first thing we studied on. And then gaining control over your desires in verses 27 through 30. Verse 33 through 37. Today is honest dealings with all men. And then verses 38 through 42, rejection of desires for revenge. So we built over the last 2 weeks, and what Jesus has built up to get to this point of love your enemies. Okay? So as we go through these last 2 weeks, you can see how it does build on each other. It's a stepping stone to how we can be more like Jesus and sacrifice like he does on things. What are the rewards of loving one's enemies. Okay? Did God love his enemies? He does, basically because he gives the rain to the just and the unjust. Okay? He gives sunlight and air to everybody. So he loves everybody, and that's what we should be doing, is loving everybody. But what should we not love? What the ungodly are doing, the actions of the ungodly. We should not love that, but we love the ungodly, okay? Just like we love everybody that's sitting in here, because you're godly people. Well, that's only the first bell. I got 5 more minutes, but I'm basically done because of hurrying through. Anybody have any questions about anything? Have we learned anything today, or brings things up that we haven't looked at in a while? The singing of some of the songs is what brought me up. You don't really think about that when you're singing them. You're just saying the words maybe, and not really thinking about the words. And that was brought up into my mind when I was preparing this lesson. That we do need to watch what we're saying, watch what we're doing all the time. You know, if you're singing about going out and evangelizing the world, as we do in some of our songs, and we're sitting there never doing anything, we're vowing something and not really doing it. So we need to look from last week's lessons and this week's lesson of the things we need to do to make us better Christians and to be more Christians or like Jesus. The old saying, what would Jesus do? Maybe we need to think of that more every time we do something. Okay? If you get upset with something, take a deep breath, let it out, and then count to 10, and then remember what Jesus would do in that case. Okay? Unfortunately in my life, I count to 10 a lot because I've tried to do that. Slow myself down instead of getting upset about something that really a lot of times doesn't mean much. Take a deep breath, count to 10, and think about your reactions to things. Okay? Because a lot of times in my past, I had a quick temper. And sometimes it comes back to me still to have a quick temper. I've tried to work on it a lot. That's one of the things my problem is. As the last line here in the book that we've been studying from, it says, how do you feel at this point? Guilty, imperfect, sore-toed? You aren't alone, because I felt that too. So I probably stepped on some toes today, but we were just studying out of the Bible. So that happens some of the time. Anybody have any questions or anything? I can't remember who teaches next week, but it will be in chapter 6 of Matthew. So read the chapter 6 of Matthew for next week. Thank you.